Hello, and welcome to another episode of Heisi History. Today, we're gonna talk about Asia in the 19th century, more specifically about China, Japan, and India, their government, economy, society, and two main conflicts in these regions.
Japan had been fragmented and feudal until the late 6th century, when a series of warrior landowners managed to consolidate power. Eventually, power came to the Tokugawa family, who imposed a bakufu, or military government, which became the main government of Japan for hundreds of years and brought stability to the country. The first one to take power of the Tokugawa family was Ieyasu, who in 16th century convinced the emperor to grant him the title of shogun. Bakufu wasn't much of centralization, since power was mostly in the hands of local lords called daimyo. There were two events that led to the end of this government. First was the Opium War, and second, the arrival of Matthew Perry in 1853, who wanted to open Japan's markets. The government was formed to sign some humiliating treaties, and this was the tipping point for the daimyo and samurai. The civil war between the stronger daimyo and the bakufu led to the end of the shogunate, and later in 1860, the new emperor Meiji abolished the bakufu and proclaimed a restoration of the imperial throne. A new constitution called Diet was later established in 1889, and they created an European-style cabinet with a prime minister.
It was a period called the Edo period. The society in that time was divided in four classes: farmers, samurai, artisans, and merchants. The economy in this period changed. The urban economy became profligate, and the rural economy impoverished. Governments could not achieve balanced budgets. The governments of the shogun and daimyo habitually forced merchants to loan money to them, but they never paid it back and didn't allow the growth of trade and merchant class. For peasants, there was only poverty, hard work in the rice fields, and short life. Each samurai was entitled to an annual salary from the daimyo called stipend, to assure they didn't become bandits. Then became the Meiji period, and it gave a good economy to Japan.
And now let's move to India. From the 6th until early 18th century, India was ruled by the Mughal Empire, Muslims ruler in the northern of India. The founder of the Mughal dynasty was Babur in 1526. He was descendant from Timur, the last great Central Asia conqueror in the Mongol tradition, and from Genghis Khan, therefore the word Mughals, which is the Persian word for Mongols. An important aspect of this government is that they consolidated the Muslims' rule over most of India. The Mughal ruler created a pretty effective empire. They extended the Mughal control over the entire Indian subcontinent. They incorporated Indian princes to the ruling class, while still maintaining top positions for Muslims. They reorganized the bureaucracy and instituted an effective tax system, which were called zamindars, and relied on agriculture and trade. The Mughal Empire began to see its end by 1757, when the British East Company established itself permanently and began its effort to colonize all of India.
In 1857, there was a rebellion in India against the British, but India lost. The British expanded their territory and took possessions. The invaders arrived by sea to market, but the more they grew their businesses, the more they want to change the economy. The imperialists built roads, railroads, and schools. They also invested in plantations and oil wells and other companies connected to the economic world, but most of the profits went abroad. The Indians workers used to exploit natural resources, sparked local protests.
Society and religion in India has passed through numerous phases of change. Throughout the 19th century, India's majority Hindu population lived within a caste system that dictated a person's permanent place in the social hierarchy. Historians claim that the British took advantage of it to help their rule. The British brought their medical skills along with improvements in transport and agriculture to India. British in India informed a society that mostly excluded the indigenous population, seeing themselves as superior to Indians and to mixed-race Anglo-Indians.
In terms of government, there was no democracy. However, during the 19th century, China was under control of the Qing dynasty, which lived from 1644 to 1912, and was the last empire to rule the region. The beginning and middle periods of this dynasty were prosperous, and in the century, even though the king emperors were incompetent and government was weak, the dynasty seems somewhat successful because the population kept growing, the territory stayed intact, and the empire slowly modernized. Internal rebellions against the Qing dynasty invasion and wars like the Sino-Japanese War, which they lost, also occurred in this century.
There was a dynasty called Yuan dynasty, but it failed because there was corruption, strong taxes, the economy gets worse and people were starving, and started the Ming dynasty. During this dynasty, the Mongols accelerated cultural exchanges by keeping active a thriving intercontinental trade and by encouraging foreigners like Marco Polo to serve in the Mongolian court in China. At the beginning of the 19th century, China was the greatest empire in the world. It had a huge economy. The administrative aspect, the empire lacked the necessary amount of officials to administer the entire territory. In the economic aspect, the lack of a national budget affected the revenues of the state. The central government then had to reduce expenditures and sell public posts, and they started to give protection to the poor. A prosperous trade between Europe and China marked the early stages of the Ming and Qing dynasty. The first Ming raised taxes, then a tribe took Peking and started the Qing dynasty and accepted the foreign trade. The opium became the main trade item. In 1850 and 1852 was the Taiping Rebellion. The leader was Hong Xiuquan and fought for the abolition of private property, sex equality, opium prohibition, etc. This was useful because everything evolved. At this time, agriculture was renewed, wheat production and rice was doubled.
During the 19th century, there wasn't an official religion in China. The most practiced religions or beliefs were Buddhism, that had spread in China since the 2nd century, Taoism, which is also believed similar to Buddhism, and Taoism. It said that a gap existed between perceived world and the real world. During the Qing dynasty, hereditary status groups ranged from the descendants of the imperial line down to the mean people at the bottom of the social ladder. Many professions were hereditary, like bannermen, brewers, dyers, doctors, navigators, and Taoist priests usually passed on their occupations to at least one son in each generation.
Most of the major conflicts in Asia happened in China, but we will only discuss two, the Opium War and the Taiping Rebellion. There was more than one Opium War, but the first one was the most important. This happened in 1839, and it all started because Britain started to trade with China without Chinese permission. British wanted tea from China, but Chinese didn't need anything from Britain. Britain started getting opium in exchange for tea into China, and by the 1840s, there were 2 million opium addicts. China only accepted payment in silver, and that was a huge problem for Britain, since they didn't have silver. So British started trading with Chinese merchants called kohong, instead of with the government, because they could pay them in any way and not only silver. This all finally ended with a series of unequal treaties in which China was forced to pay and to cede Hong Kong to Britain. Now, let's move to the Taiping Rebellion from 1850 to 1864. This all started thanks to this crazy guy called Hong Xiuquan, who had a dream he was chosen by God to destroy the Manchu rulers. During this war, about 20 million lives were lost, which is a lot of lives. Just think that in World War I, about 17 million lives were lost, and that is one of the deadliest conflicts in history. Well, Xiuquan finally made it to the power, and although he was crazy, he did some pretty good things for China. He banned opium, slavery, prostitution, and other bad things, so he wasn't so bad at all.
Let's move on to the conclusion. The major industrial powers, England, France, Germany, and Russia, expanded through these territories in order to obtain raw materials and cheap labor and new markets to place their manufactured products. Asia suffered many damage when the European powers arrived and forced to make treaties, especially drug treaties, such as opium. Opium was a large income of the British, and at the same time it used to pay China for the export of tea. The opium trade in China was rejected and banned, as it caused a strong addition to its population with serious social and economic consequences, while Great Britain smuggled opium from the British India and introduced it to China, and from the opium ban, Opium War began. Also, the arrival of Europeans affected their culture, economic, religion, customs, food, and so on. Asia is currently one of the most developed continents in technology in the world and also with one of the best levels of education. Thank you. See you in the next Heisi History.